afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your days to join us today as we talk a little bit about COVID-19 again. I know many of you have joined us over the past few weeks, and we've covered a lot of different topics as it relates to Duchenne and COVID-19 and what it means for us and our families. But today we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about the stress and anxiety that comes with social distancing, self-isolation, and quarantine. I know that can be really difficult for all of us to manage. So we've got a couple of really wonderful speakers today. We have Molly Colvin from Mass General and Natalie Truba from Nationwide Children's, and they're going to take a deeper dive into the stress and anxiety that we see both in ourselves and in our boys with Duchenne, and how to cope effectively as possible. So at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Molly Colvin, who is going to tell us a little bit about parenting during a pandemic. Molly?
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to PPMD for inviting me to talk about coping with anxiety and stress during the COVID-19 pandemic. For parents, this is a really challenging time. It's even more challenging for parents of children who have Duchenne or Becker muscular dystrophy. Every day, we are being bombarded with images and stories of our healthcare systems being overwhelmed by the needs of COVID-19 patients. While the numbers of those in New York are especially startling, many American cities are facing shortages of healthcare resources that are critical for also meeting the needs of those with DMD and BMD. So right now, worry is a completely normal response to our environment. If you are a parent of a child with a chronic medical condition, including muscular dystrophy, and weren't a little worried, then I might actually be worried about you. The reason that I might be concerned is that in the short run, worry and stress can actually be adaptive. Stress increases our arousal level so that we can focus on what is bothering us and effectively problem solve or relieve the stress from the environment. If there's too little stress or worry, shown here by the yellow part of the graph, then you may not actually perform well in the current circumstances. But if there's too much stress, shown here with the red in the graph, or too much arousal, that can also lead to a decrease in performance over time. When stressors don't resolve, chronic stress sets in, and this is where we all are right now. We're becoming resistant to stress over time, shown here as stage 2. We may function close to normal or in some moments even better than normal, but it takes a lot more energy for our bodies and our brains to keep this up. And so eventually we're at risk of becoming exhausted and showing decreased resistance to stress and a decline in our ability to manage our daily affairs. This is why it's so important for us to take care of ourselves right now. We must employ strategies to prevent such exhaustion. Recognizing the signs and symptoms of stress and anxiety is the first step. We've probably all heard about the fight, flight, or freeze response to stress. When there's a threat in our environment, it's completely normal for our body to gear up and to do one of these 3 things. These are some of the well-known physiological symptoms that are triggered by environmental stressors, and they impact multiple bodily systems. You've probably all been familiar with experiencing some muscle tightness or racing heart or shallow or rapid breathing, dry mouth, chest tightness, sweating or trembling. Those are all common signs of stress in our body. The cognitive symptoms of stress and anxiety are not often as discussed, but they're critical to recognize. I often hear people describe this as a little bit of a brain fog because our thoughts may start to race with worry. We may feel more irritable or fearful. There may be intrusive thoughts or worries, and even difficulties with forgetfulness or concentrating. It's important to recognize these cognitive symptoms because they have a tendency to spiral or to propagate themselves. Some colleagues in Brandeis made this really great worry chain where they show that a series of thoughts can take you from something as simple as, I have a headache, to imagining an apocalypse and losing everybody who you know and love. This worry chain often starts without our even being aware of it and can take up a lot of our own cognitive processing resources. So it's important to recognize when you're starting to have this chain and to stop it if you can. Which brings us to coping strategies. How do we manage during this time of increased stress? The first point is to really take care of our basic needs. During this time when we're all at home, it's really easy to kind of let a schedule slide, but also really important to try to put one in place. Keeping a regular schedule that includes regular times for sleep, for exercise, and for meals means that we are taking care of our basic needs, and we're doing it at a rate that our body needs. And that alone will sort of improve our ability to cope with the physiological and cognitive signs of stress. We've probably all heard the phrase, put on your own oxygen mask first. And this is a really key point, especially for parents who are parenting kids who have chronic medical needs. We can't take care of ourselves or our families or our children if we don't first make sure that we ourselves are getting what we need. So daily self-care is critical. Finding time to do things that you enjoy or that bring you some sense of normalcy or relief from the pressures that we're currently under are key. That might be working in a garden or listening to music or going for a walk. Simple things that keep us grounded in the present are things that are going to help us to manage in the long run. Being mindful of what your body and your mind are doing will help you to manage stress. During this time, it's really easy for us to start to worry about how long this will take or when this will end. And the answer is we don't know. So it's important to take it one day at a time. To become aware when your mind is starting to race and to try to slow it down by doing some of those activities that you enjoy. Paying attention to your environment, doing something as simple as noticing whether the flowers in your garden have bloomed more today than yesterday is something that will bring you into the current time and help you to focus on the environment or your surroundings that are immediate. And then checking in with your body. How tense are your muscles? Is your breathing a little bit shallow? Can you take a big deep breath and do some muscle relaxation and find a way to be grounded in the present? It's really important to identify what you can control and let go of what you can't. It's the things that you can't that will start the worry chain that we were talking about earlier. So the things that are within your sphere of influence, or the things that you can control, include things like exposure to the news, whether you're making time for self-care or engaging in free time, the extent to which you're following a daily schedule, how you respond to your children, and things like whether you've got a plan for medical needs, whether you've taken inventory for medications or talked to your doctors about when and if services need to be provided, the extent to which you wash your hands and wear a face mask. Those are all things that you can control right now. What you can't control is what's going to happen to the world economy or how governments will respond to the current crisis. Things that other people say or do on Facebook or Twitter or even in conversation. Whether your community hospitals will have resources that you might need in the event of an emergency. How long the current pandemic will last, and you can never really control the weather. If you focus on the things that you can't control, that's likely to increase your level of anxiety because there's nothing that you can actually do about those things. Focusing on the present and the things that you can control will help you to feel like you have some sense of agency and that you're prepared, but not focusing or worrying about what's beyond your control. Social support is really important. We know that it's important in general for parents of kids who have chronic medical conditions, and it's often really hard to get in the best of circumstances. In times of social distancing, it's even harder. And so it's important to schedule regular time to talk to family and friends. Many of you have probably tried this, whether by virtual game nights or phone calls or even using platforms like Zoom or FaceTime to talk with the friends and family who are important in our lives but who aren't with us. In those conversations, it's important to keep the conversations focused on topics that are within your sphere of influence. It's sometimes what happens in conversations is that we start to talk about the things that are outside of our sphere of influence, which then just increases the anxiety both for you and for the person who you're talking to. So limit the time that you're talking about things that are outside your sphere of influence and talk more about things that are in the present or within your sphere of influence. Identify the community resources that are still available to you, whether that's through church or support groups or other community organizations that you've been involved with in the past. Finding ways to support others in need is often a way to also feel grounded within your community and to help give a sense of purpose. And this is hard, but it's really important to let others know if you need help. You shouldn't feel like you're struggling alone. We're all in this together. And it's important to let people know if it's time for you to get a little bit of extra help. Supporting your family. If you're doing self-care and doing some of the strategies we've just discussed, then supporting your family will be easier. But it's also important to recognize some of the needs of the system. Maintaining a regular schedule for sleep and exercise and eating are all things that are important for your family as well as for you. To help your children, it's important to make time to talk. Almost all kids are aware on some level that things are not normal right now. They're not in school, they're not getting their therapies as often, everybody's at home, people may be a little bit more irritable or a little bit more stressed. It's important to make time, I would say at least once a day, to check in with your children and to see how they're doing. When you have those conversations, it's important to recognize that your perspective on the current situation is different from theirs. So the things that you may be thinking about or preoccupied by or the worries that you have may not actually be the same worries that they have. And so to figure this out, it's important to start the conversation by letting them lead. Ask them questions about what they know or what they've heard about. And then use developmentally appropriate language to tailor the conversation so that they can understand what you're saying and also so that you can hear them. Sometimes the best way to do this is not necessarily to sort of sit down at the dinner table and go face to face and to say, how are you feeling? But to start with a play activity, whether you're doing a puzzle together or you're playing with toys or you're even talking to them while they're engaged in one of their preferred activities. If you've got at least some of their attention, sometimes it's easier for them to start to open up and talk to you when you're doing these kinds of relaxed activities together. In the course of the conversation, it's really important to reassure them that you will take care of them, that you've got this, and that you're the one who's taking on the big worries. Sometimes it's as simple as saying to your child, why don't you give me that worry, and then mimicking the actual physical giving the worry over. By putting it in your hand or by putting it in a box and then closing the lid so that they know that they can give it to you and that you will take care of it. It's also physical reassurance and touch through hugs and through touching a hand or touching a shoulder can also be really powerful for kids. And during this time, it's also important to limit their news exposure. Many of the things that are in the news right now for many children are hard to understand, and they are definitely in that sphere of influence of things outside the sphere of influence, meaning in the circle of things that they can't control. And it's important to limit their news exposure and to help them feel safe and comfortable in their own environment. Being a role model by practicing the self-care strategies and the relaxation and anxiety management strategies we were talking about is really important because often we learn by doing, and behaviors catch within families, both good and bad. So if you are leading by example and practicing good behaviors to manage anxiety and stress and to openly discuss it, it often makes space for the people in your family to follow. I would strongly recommend making time almost every day to plan something that's fun to do as a family, watching a movie, even playing video games together, doing a puzzle, reading a story, picking out, some sort of a tour that you want to take online of a national park or a world site, something that brings your attention outside of the things that are causing stress right now and gives you a joint experience of something that is fun and relaxing. When you are under stress, it's really easy to be a little bit snappy and a little bit grouchy. And I think when you notice that within yourself, it's really important to take a moment and to try to choose deliberately how you respond to those in your family and those who you're living with. And choosing to respond with love and kindness and compassion whenever possible. That's harder said than done sometimes. It's easier said than done, but it is important, especially during times of stress. Making time to talk together about worries, this is very much like what we were just discussing around your children. And finally, for those who are with partners or who are married, it's really important to nurture your partnership. It's a stressful time, but if you can maintain the perspective that you're in this together, and if your partnership is strong, then it will help both of you to manage self-care. We're on a long road right now, and I don't know how long it will be. It's certainly challenging. And one of the things that's most important is maintaining hope as we travel together down this road. I'm going to now turn it over to Dr. Truba, who will talk about recognizing and managing anxiety and stress in our boys, and I'm happy to address other questions when we get to the Q&A. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much, Dr. Colvin. I hope a lot of my talk will sort of reiterate and reinforce a lot of what she has already talked about, but really focused on how do we help manage our boys. So at baseline, we tend to see some challenging behaviors pre-COVID-19 pandemic. Our boys are amazing, but they do tend to struggle with some really challenging behaviors, particularly those related to managing and tolerating big swings in physiological arousal that are influenced largely by our environment and things outside of our control. So really quick, I want to go over conceptually how we make sense of this. So our boys have at baseline a really hard time managing and habituating to sensory stimulus. So in a sense, their autonomic nervous system, their fight or flight system is always kind of on. And so their body learns to be aroused in all of their different environments, school and home, in their bedroom and with their dad, with their mom, with their brothers. And this generalizes. So they quickly sort of develop this chronic hyperarousal pattern, which really reduces their ability to tolerate even minor distress. So this is where we start to see these meltdowns when over little things, like a sibling moves their marker 6 inches and they're kind of losing their mind. It's really sort of kicks them up and causes their brain to sort of start to anticipate or to think about everything happening around them as potential threats. And so they develop a lot of anticipatory anxiety, and they start to develop some reasonably effective but pretty maladaptive coping behaviors like extreme ordering and rigidity around what they're willing to do and what fabrics they wear and how they want things ordered and how they want their food cut up. So over time, most of us can sort of use parts of our muscles and parts of our body physically to help regulate that overarousal system. The system that shuts down that fight or flight system is largely driven by breathing. And when your muscles don't work as well as they should, we can experience really shallow breathing patterns, those anxious breathing patterns at baseline, even when they're not anxious. And so they really quickly can find themselves in a really negative feedback loop that already happens before they're on steroids. Then we add steroids, and now we've thrown in a global pandemic. So we're likely seeing kind of all of the things we normally see, just a lot worse. And so this will be the tricky part of managing this over time, in that our boys struggle with small changes and small things in general, and we have just thrown a whole big new thing at them. So this is a huge change in routine and what feels normal and what is normal to them. They struggle with minor changes in routine. And so a pandemic characterized by unknown, by sensationalized media, and by the spreading of misinformation is going to be incredibly distressing and distress-producing for them. Not only that, but then we have the cumulative sort of impact of society, of societal distress, your distress, other modalities that they contact people in are distressed. We are all feeling this because this is distressing. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how this is going to play out. We're getting a lot of different types of information from different media sources. So even though we're doing our best to be healthy, our kids are going to feel that. These boys are going to feel that even stronger. And then because they don't have sort of a trusted roadmap or a way of providing a framework for making sense of what they're feeling right now, because this is new for everybody, you can really quickly start to feel very vulnerable and to feel very confused and overwhelmed by just the lack of having something concrete to help them orient to what's happening to them. And then they really struggle to abstract or to sort of separate parts from wholes and to recognize that even things happening together can have separate pieces, and we can think about them separate from each other. It's not all or nothing, which really causes some difficulty in being able to accept and be able to engage with just feeling uncomfortable. And so they're constantly seeking and trying to feel better. And unfortunately, what they're doing is using behaviors that often are making these things worse for them and for y'all. So what do we do? As Dr. Colvin was saying, we really want to maintain baseline expectations for behavior and consequences. I strongly encourage everyone to implement a token economy in their home. I am happy to post steps on doing this after this presentation if people are interested. You want to develop schedules and routines to fit your new temporary normal, and you want to talk about it like that. And so this doesn't have to be a full day routine, but a routine that is consistent daily, that provides structure from day to day. It doesn't have to be full structure, 8-10 hours a day, but some type of structure that is consistent throughout your days. This then will allow you to build in times where you're really taking steps to practice identifying and labeling internal experiences such as thoughts, feelings, and emotions. So just as you carve out structured time to review math concepts each day, you want to carve out structured time to review concepts for why feelings, thoughts, and behaviors are all influenced by each other, and how do we engage with them differently to help ourselves feel better and to help ourselves understand what's happening for us. You then can also build in unstructured times, maybe 20, 30 minutes that are just quiet, relaxing, and a reflective time where they can journal or write stories or draw pictures about their experiences that you can review with them later, have them read books that are strength-based that you can talk about, strategies the protagonist used that were effective or not effective, what your child would have done in that moment. But this has to be cultivated and grown, just as understanding any difficult conceptual thing needs to be cultivated and grown. And so if you take 30 minutes for each of this a day, that's about an hour where you're really just focusing on helping your child learn how to make sense of what's going on for themselves. You also really want to focus on their ability in particular, to endure and live life. So we cannot predict the future, and we can't plan for things that we can't predict. So what we can do is plan for how we'll respond to things that happen that are unexpected and stressful. So you want to develop a plan for what you'll do, what steps you'll take, what steps your kids will take when something is stressful and or unexpected is happening, or when they're feeling really overwhelmed, or when they're struggling. In addition to that, you really want to work with your child to develop a list of positive self-talk statements that they can use in these moments, or in moments when you need them to kind of sit with their distress, because no matter what you do, even providing reassurance, it isn't going to help them feel better. We want to practice these things when they're not stressed or when they're not spiraling about something specific. So a positive self-talk statement may look like, Having your child describe themselves as brave and that they are taking all the steps their doctors and parents are recommending to keep themselves safe. And so they might be scared, but they know that they're going to be okay because we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing. And you have them rehearse that and recite that. They're not going to know what to do or be able to pull the plan out, and they're not going to be able to use self-talk statements if they're not rehearsed over and over and over because they're not going to believe them. The automaticity of these boys' negative sort of thinking patterns is robust. And so we have to counteract that by forcing them to engage in positive self-talk statements to help develop those neural pathways. Once those neural pathways are developed, which means you have to walk that path a lot, so you think about treading a path through grass in your yard. One time you won't really notice it. If you do it over and over and over and over, that path starts to develop. So we do that, and then that will be much easier for them to do in moments of distress. But that is not something they will be able to do unless it's practiced extensively. You want to model adaptive coping behavior. So Dr. Colvin talked about this, but we do know the best predictor of child coping is parent coping. So if your child is really struggling, particularly struggling during a week or on a day, that is a good time to kind of 10,000 feet above the situation and look at yourself, look at your family, look at the people that you guys have been engaging with or your activities. Likely, there are things that you're dealing with, other people in your family are dealing with that are influencing their coping and behavior in that moment. And so again, it is really, really important that you are managing yourself in a way that allows you to help your child cope as healthy as possible. They're kind of like a barometer in that way, right? If they're struggling even more so, you are probably struggling more so. In this sense, you really want to fight the urge to give in to constant checking and reassurance-seeking behavior. Easier said than done, I get this. Unfortunately, providing that reassurance in the moment, so when they're constantly checking, like, when are we talking to Grandpa again? When are we talking to Grandpa again? You've already told them you're talking to Grandpa again today at 5 p.m. After that moment, anytime they come to seek that, like, when are we talking to Grandpa again? And you say 5 p.m., you are reinforcing that reassurance-seeking behavior. If that truly gave them relief, they would quit reassurance seeking, but they don't. They are not feeling better when you tell them that. So what we want to do is we want to say something like, I've already told you what time we're talking with grandfather. What time did I tell you? They're going to tell you 5. And then you say, good job. Now you can go say that to yourself over and over, and you're a broken record with that throughout the rest of the day. We need to extinguish our propensity to give in to this behavior because this is largely what is driving this perseverative sort of inability to shift off some of these things that drives a lot of you crazy, I know. Scheduling worry time is a really good strategy. Again, after your designated worry time, you want to make sure that you tell your kid that you're going to ignore their attempts to continue to talk about these worries. You don't want to be mean about it, right? Like, it's gentle ignoring, like, nope, we already talked about those worries, so we're not going to keep doing that. What are some other things that maybe you can do? One of those things might be to start a worry jar. Dr. Colvin talked briefly about this, but this is a nice letting go exercise. So a lot of families that use worry jars use them kind of related to that worry time. And what they'll say is, it sounds like you're still having a hard time with that worry. Why don't you go write it down and lock it away in the jar so it's not on your mind as much, right? And you want to develop that ritual around helping them let go or separate from that worry and to give it away. You want to schedule breaks, you want to take them. If you've ever heard me give a talk before, you know that one of the things that I think is a godsend for these kids is schedule breaks throughout the day, regardless of activity. So you want to continue to do that. And you really want to regulate media consumption. Be a hawk about what your kids are consuming. These boys have very rigid beliefs, and once they've developed a belief, it is hard to change that. So the best way to stay ahead of false beliefs or beliefs that are particularly anxiety-provoking are to prevent them from taking root. So we want to be very mindful of the information these boys are receiving. Unfortunately, they tend to be incredibly computer savvy and very smart. And so we want to make sure that we're doing this in a way that is teaching them how to self-select and be informed and to fight the urge to go down that rabbit hole of consuming scary information, which for some reason many of them do enjoy doing. Get outside and make fun happen. Resiliency is taught and shaped through experience. So now is your opportunity. This is the time to show your kids, how do we learn to sit with discomfort? How do we learn to live life? And how do we learn to go through things even though it may feel chaotic and even though we don't know what to do, and thrive based on our strengths and based on what we know we are capable of doing? I 1000% agree with the suggestion to practice kindness and compassion. One of the ways to do this is through gratitude exercises. There's a lot of different gratitude exercises available online. I strongly encourage you to develop a gratitude exercise for yourself as well as for your family. It may seem cheesy, but I do promise you will feel better and you will feel some sense of negativity relief when you're doing these exercises. And it's not always going to feel like over the next several months, but I promise you've got this. As a community, you guys have done amazing things, and I have no reason to think that all of a sudden your ability to thrive and to innovate in these moments would change. So I believe Dr. Colvin and I are taking questions now moving forward, and we're happy to answer any questions, and we continue to put information out that would be helpful to you all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Colvin. Thank you so much, Dr. Truba. Those were fantastic presentations. I know that I myself really took a lot from that as far as tangible things that I can be doing with my own family and my own home to really ease the stress and anxiety that I and my family are experiencing right now. And I hope that everybody on the phone was able to take some of that away as well. So as Dr. Truba mentioned, at this point, we're going to go ahead and open things up to questions. You'll find a chat box function in the lower left-hand side of your screen. Go ahead and just type away. Give us the questions. What are you guys thinking about? What do you want to know more about that we can dive into? We would love to dive a little bit deeper on some of those topics. One of the first questions that we got, I know that Dr. Truba, you talked a little bit about some of these tangible things that we can do with our kids. And I think it would be really helpful for us to understand, are there any differences in the way that we would approach our younger boys, say, preschool or grade school versus our older kids that are maybe middle school or high school age?
Absolutely. For your younger boys, those more concrete, structured, sort of unstructured times where you're really sitting down with them and helping them make sense of their internal experiences are going to be really important and really powerful. Feelings games, really different body awareness training strategies like Tin Man, Straw Man, which is where you have your kids stand up with you and you tighten all your muscles and then you relax and you just have them talk through like, oh, I noticed I feel better when my muscles relax. And you're just helping them sort of notice differences in their bodies and how their body feels and what do they like and not like. And you're kind of guiding your younger kiddos through that as they age. You want to shift more into those higher order, more complex cognitive tasks around talking about feelings, around really processing and working through making sense of that worry chain sort of, right? Like how did that worry progress and like where do we need to intervene to tell our brains to stop that? And how do we understand why our brains do that? And do we need to believe everything our brains think? And do we need to believe everything our brains tell us? And what do we do when our brain is not being our friend and not being helpful, right? We talk back to our brain. We bully our brain back when it's bullying us. So we use a little bit more cognitive strategies. For your older kids and for your younger kids, if you're really struggling and the strategies that you can find readily available online aren't sufficient, I probably would reach out to a local mental health provider to help you and your son develop your ability to kind of do that higher order cognitive processing around some of those things. A few sessions should be sufficient to kind of give you the basic abilities to do that.
All right, that's fantastic. All right, so the next question we've got, maybe Dr. Colvin, you could field this one for us. What if we find ourselves wanting to consume lots of media, whether it be news, social media? I think it's really tough. We've got all of this extra time at home. And I know that I personally, one of the ways that I kind of handle things, I just want to watch the news all the time. And that maybe isn't the most helpful for me, at least. It might be different for others. But what would you say for folks who find themselves wanting to really uptick with that media consumption?
That's a great question. And I think this is one that we probably all struggle with, especially over the last couple of weeks with things having changed so quickly, right? So if we think about where we were a month ago, many of us were still sort of following our day-to-day routines. And then things seem to change quickly day by day. It seemed like every time you turned around, there was some new announcement about what was happening, and there was some new decision about things that were closing down or being rescheduled or being postponed. And it kind of quickly became apparent that we had a really big threat on our hands. So what happened for all of us during that time is that our sort of fight or flight response, fight, flight, or freeze response sort of got ramped up. And we started really looking for signs and indicators of threat in our environment. And so it was what we were doing is turning to media to scan and look for those threats. So I know during the last few weeks, I have also started checking the news and more often. And, after my kids would go to bed, I wanted to sort of watch the news and sort of hear more about it. But I think what happens over time is that by doing that checking behavior, it's a lot like the reassurance behavior that Dr. Truba was talking about with the boys. By doing that and by feeding that urge to check media, to look for a new threat, you might temporarily feel better, but if the only way your body knows to feel better is to check the news, you're going to keep checking, and you're going to check more and more over time. And every time you check, you then entered that zone of things that you can't control, and you're being pulled away from the present and away from the things that you can control. So it's really important, to the best ability that you can, to sometimes deny yourself the check. So say, I'm not going to look right now. One of the things that you can do, and I'm going to admit that I've done this myself, is sort of say, I'm only going to look at the news for 20 minutes in the morning and then 20 minutes in the evening, ideally not before bed, because that gets you all amped up and then it's hard to sleep. But to add it as part of your regular schedule. Turn off the push notifications on your phone so that you are not getting notification after notification all day long about what's happening. And really sort of schedule it until your body stops craving those checks. Every time you want to check, substitute a behavior that is around mindfulness or that is around something that is within your control or within your sphere. Instead of checking the news, maybe you sort of say hi to your kid and give them a hug, or you smell the flowers, or you take a walk. That sort of, inhibiting the urge to check and stopping yourself and scheduling it are things I would suggest.
And to add to that just a little, I would use that as an opportunity to model for your kids too. So that was a beautiful response from Dr. Colvin. Use that to help your kids understand what their own brain is doing. Use metaphors and analogies like, oh, my wildfire anxiety brain is telling me to add more fuel to my fire in my brain, and I want to look at the news, but I know I need to starve that fire, right? So what's something else we could do to distract ourselves, right? And so you're teaching your kid what they do when they're having that same experience, right? So this is a really parallel process that we could use right now to highlight how normal it is for your kids to experience this, and what do we do about it? Not that we feel better necessarily, but it's a way that we prevent ourselves from feeling worse over time.
I love that. I think that was so helpful. I know that one of the things that I in my own life have had to do is try and minimize that consumption. And I think that concept of scheduling these check-ins makes so much sense. So for any listeners who are in Ohio, we know that Governor Mike and Dr. Amy talk every day at 2. And so that's when I allow myself to have that news consumption because it's structured, it's scheduled, and I found it incredibly helpful. So I just love that concept. I never really thought about creating an actual schedule, but it makes all the sense in the world. So that's just wonderful. All right. So our next question. What's the best way to create follow-through with rituals such as gratitude, worry jars, things of that nature? I'll toss that to both of you, and whoever wants to jump in, go for it.
There's a lot of different ways. It kind of depends on your family. So building a schedule and having it be a regular part of your day is one of the best ways to kind of get a habit going. The other way, though, is by building in that token economy. And so you can start to reward your child for engaging in something that's difficult for them. So when they're coming to you for reassurance, and instead of continuing to reassure and seek from you, they actually follow through with that strategy, they would earn tokens for that they could turn in for iPad time later. So it's motivating them to sit with and to engage in these things that they, A, don't want to do, that B, take a lot of cognitive and physical energy to do, and that C, do require you to sit with distress, right? So they want to feel better, and what we're saying is, I'm not going to make you feel better. You need to make you feel better, which means you need to be okay not being okay, right? Like that's a lot to put on these kids, and so you want to reward that, and we need to motivate them in order to be able for them to be motivated to sit with something that's really hard for them to do.
I think I think it's great advice. I think one of the other ways that I sometimes encourage building a habit is to pair it with something that you know you're going to do. So things like gratitude, many families will sort of choose to pair that with meals. So, for some families who might be sort of religious, that might look like prayer, but it also could be more secular and sort of look like, we're going to go around the table and everybody's going to say something that they are grateful for. Or that, also I think related to that, to sort of anchor into the here and the now, that may also be a good time just to say, something that you're feeling in your body or something that you learned that day. So if you sort of those are all places to sort of integrate and build connectedness within your family, especially when you're sort of doing those rituals together.
All right, that's great. All right, so we've got a couple of questions about our adult guys with Duchenne. So the first one I'm going to ask is about how to manage stress and anxiety for our adult men with Duchenne. Is there any sort of difference that we should keep in mind, a difference in our recommendations, and how can we help them really cope with the changes that they're experiencing right now, as far as, not really getting to see friends as much or having that level of interaction that they had before they found themselves in a quarantine type situation?
At a basic level, many of the same strategies we've been talking about from managing anxiety and stress in parents are going to apply also to adults with Duchenne. But I think that there are also some unique stressors. I think, it feels different when it's something that you're being personally affected by than something that you may sort of be in a parenting role where you're worried for your child. I think especially with many of the conversations that have been having at kind of a national level about allocation of medical resources, it can be an especially sort of anxiety-provoking time for those who are living with chronic medical conditions. And so I think that does need to be recognized. And much as I was saying for parents, recognize that that is a normal worry and stress, but if we don't sort of put the brakes on and build in time to sort of stop that worry chain and to use strategies to stop the worry chain, it will similarly sort of push us into a place of paralysis or decreased functioning that isn't going to be good in terms of maintaining the long haul and doing everything that is needed in a day-to-day function. I think this is where reaching out to the community is going to be particularly helpful. And I know PPMD could probably facilitate that and point to some resources there. But also, this is where I would say making sure that there is scheduled time for social interaction and tapping into sources of support and doing that virtually is going to be really important. And really focusing on the things that are within your sphere of influence.
Dr. Colvin, that actually is a beautiful segue. I was going to mention this at the end, but I'll mention it now. PPMD is actually hosting a Google Hangout or a Zoom Hangout rather for our PAC guys and our adults and teens with Duchenne. So go check out the Facebook page and go ahead and get registered. It is tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern. We're offering this opportunity for the guys to get together, share their thoughts, hang out, spend some time with one another, and hopefully just de-stress a little bit and just enjoy each other's company.
Hey, Kathy, is that the perfect segue? Is that something people can get information from PPMD's parent site?
So we've got a couple of different resources that folks can access. One is the Facebook Hangout that we just mentioned for our teens and adults to spend some time with one another. But we also have our COVID-19 landing page at parentprojectmd.org. So that landing page has a lot of different resources specific to Duchenne and general COVID-19 information as well. So go there. It's got an FAQ document that we're updating live, trying to just add in as many questions with answers that have been curated by a lot of our CDCC clinicians to use as a frame of reference. The chances are if you have a question, somebody else has had that same question. So go and check that out. And if you have a question that you don't see the answer to, shoot us an email. We are happy to work with you to find the answer if you're having a hard time tracking down that information that you're looking for. That website is constantly evolving and changing to meet the needs of our families. That's really what it's there for. So like I said, if you have questions, let us know what they are. We are absolutely happy to help you find the answers and then share that with everybody else too. All right, so I have a question of my own. What do we do for our guys who might be having a hard time when it comes to receiving medical services because of anxiety surrounding this pandemic? Maybe it's an infusion nurse in the home. Maybe it's a PCA that comes to the home to provide care on a daily or weekly basis, to provide respite care, things of that nature. What do we do in those cases when our guys are feeling so anxious that perhaps it starts to disrupt access to really critical medical care? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a big challenge, and probably both of us will have to go back and forth to answer this for a few minutes. But I think off the bat, this is something that a lot of people are probably experiencing. We see that at baseline. As much rehearsal and practice around in-home medical visits that you can do before they're happening, that is going to be one good strategy. And this practice is rehearsing and reciting and kind of repeating over and over so we start to believe it, the rationale for why we have to do these things and reminding ourselves of all the times we've done this and been fine and not gotten illnesses, and there's always illnesses kind of floating around, and reminding of all the safety precautions our nurses take. And then you rehearse and you plan for what sort of thoughts that we're going to have that are distressing. What are we going to have in our body that's distressing? Like, we can predict that these things are going to happen. So that helps us better manage the panic that follows that. So it doesn't feel as overwhelming. So if we're planning for it right beforehand, we can kind of come up with a strategy or sort of a plan for what we're going to do in that moment versus kind of waiting for that moment to occur. And you just go over that over day.
Yeah, I think planning for it is a really important point. And I think this is also where good communication with your medical care team is going to be really important. So, to some extent, it would be normal to worry about any care coming into your home, any caregivers coming into your home. And yet it may be absolutely critical in terms of managing family functioning so that the family and also those living with DMD don't become overwhelmed, right? So if we're in this long haul, we don't want to sort of reduce our in-home support services and therapies to the point where it then compromises family functioning and also our own health. And so I also think that with this, that's really a time to reach out to your medical team and have a conversation about what services are necessary and what services are good to have, and then kind of just determine what you feel about them, whether the good to have can be spaced out more, if it's necessary, can visits be kind of managed so that they are less frequent. Can you sort of make a plan that maybe minimizes the contact within the home while maintaining the same level of health? I think the other point of communication would be around the people coming into your home to provide those services, and whether it's talking to them or talking to their agencies about what policies and procedures they've had in place to the extent that people are required to do social distancing, how many other families are they serving, are they using PPE, and is it available to them? I think those are all things that you can ask that are sort of reasonable precautions and understanding and understandable given the circumstances. But I think what we don't want is for the fear of, if those precautions are being taken, we don't want the fear of the possibility to then interfere to the degree that the health of your child or yourself is compromised.
Thank you, Dr. Colvin. Maybe you could build out a little bit more about what some signs and symptoms might be, maybe not necessarily with access to care within the home, but just coping with stress and anxiety in our boys in general. When should we seek out that professional help? What are some signs that, maybe things are a little bit beyond what we're able to handle on our own, and maybe we need some extra help And then how would we go about accessing that help, particularly now when it is really tough to just go down to the local clinic or wherever it is that we might typically receive care?
I think that's a really good question. I think maybe both of us can answer this too. I think when, the worries or the behaviors that are related to the worries are interfering with daily functioning, which granted right now everybody's adjusting to what daily functioning looks like. But when it keeps you from being able to stay focused on the present or enjoy an activity with your family, or all conversations come back to things that are beyond your sphere of control, or, you know that there have been reasonable precautions and it's really important and you've decided with your doctor that you need that support or that intervention, but the fear itself is keeping you from being willing to engage in it. Those are all times where I think a little bit of extra support is necessary. I think the good news is that many hospitals and clinics have retooled rather quickly, and that's certainly been the case for mine, to do more virtual visits. So many providers are actually continuing to provide services by phone or by video. And if worries are really sort of taking over and you're needing to make some decisions about clinical care management, that's a really good time to reach out to your nurse coordinator or the clinic where you're primarily getting care and to set up a visit. And they are likely within hospitals, what's happening right now, at least especially even within my own, I'm pretty sure this is probably happening with Natalie too, is that many of us who are mental health providers are actually also having sort of an increase in load around virtual care because so many of these concerns are kind of coming up. And we're trying to respond as flexibly as possible. So I would then, if it's a concern that's sort of increasing over time, I would say loop back to where you're getting medical care and ask for mental health support if needed.
Yeah. I think in addition, for me, I don't want to pathologize normal responses, and part of these kids they're going to struggle with that's a normative response for them. Where I get really concerned is when it's starting to interrupt things that we know are going to just really race them down that struggle track. So if they're not sleeping, or if their sleep is incredibly interrupted, or if they're not falling asleep for many, many hours and they normally sleep decently, that would be something that would be worrisome to me. If we're seeing significant changes in baseline behavior, so your child normally is pretty compliant and they're no longer being compliant, or your child is not usually clingy and they're incredibly clingy, or they normally love playing their Xbox and now they don't want to do anything but hang out with you, right? Like those would be things that I would be a little bit more concerned about, that I might encourage you to seek more professional help with to help kind of get back on track as quickly as possible. The other things would be for yourself, right? If you're noticing big changes in thinking or your own behavior, right? Like if you no longer have the motivation to bathe daily or to do things that you enjoy, like call your mom or talk to your husband or talk to your wife, those would be things that I would be worried about, because we want to make sure that you are as healthy as you can be, because if you are not as healthy as you can be, your children will not be as healthy as they can be. And so, yeah, we want to manage these boys' mental health, but it's also as important, if not maybe even more important, that we're also managing our own mental health in order for us to have sort of the baseline abilities in order to sort of cope with how their distress looks like.
Dr. Truba, that was so well said, and I think it's so easy sometimes to forget to take care of ourselves when we're so consumed with taking care of our families. So I personally really appreciate that point. I think that was very, very timely and important for us to all remember that to best take care of our families, we have to take care of ourselves as well. It looks like that about concludes the questions that we've received so far. So I really appreciate everybody chiming in with their questions and concerns and thoughts. I think that we've had some really great conversations this afternoon. I know that I personally have learned a lot, and I hope you all have as well. As a reminder, we do have that teen and adult Zoom get-together hosted tomorrow night by the PAC at 7 p.m. EST. go check out our Facebook page, get registered, have some fun with that. And then I also wanted to mention that this is recorded. So this is going to be available on our website and our YouTube channels if you want to go back and listen again, or if you want to share with a friend. So go ahead and keep that in mind as well. And please continue this conversation with us. I think that these are really trying times for all of us, and I know that it's been really great to have this open line of communication to be able to figure out what's going on, what are your concerns, what's bothering you, and how can we help everybody work through that. So we've had this weekly webinar series, and we're going to keep having this weekly webinar series. So let us know what's on your mind, what are you thinking about, what can we talk about, what can we dive into that would be helpful. So please send us your questions. My email is rachel@parentprojectmd.org. And you can also send questions to amanda@parentprojectmd.org. We're happy to have these conversations and really keep things going and help us to all just live through this really unique and scary time as best as we possibly can given the circumstances. So again, thank you everyone for joining today. I hope that you all go and have wonderful remainders of your week. And that concludes today's webinar. Thanks so much.